If you're taking any of the steps that we talk about in our videos or in our books or in our courses to improve digestive malfunctions, it can be a little bit confusing sometimes because some of the signs of digestion improving might not be so pleasant for everybody. So in this video, I'm going to help you understand some of those signs that can come about when you're creating improvements to digestive malfunctions. This is going to be good.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So over on our video for Did Food Poisoning Springboard My Digestive Troubles, Elaine asked us, will you please do a video on what negative signs we may see that tell us that our efforts to improve our digestion are starting to work? For example, I watched your video that said smelly gas can be a sign that bile is starting to flow better. Since I started working to improve bile flow and taking HCl, my skin has gotten worse. I believe it's pustular rosacea that developed not too long after I started eating keto/ketovore, kind of like a keto carnivore combo. So I'm wondering if that's actually a good sign. Thanks again. So that's a great question, Elaine, and I don't know Elaine, so I'm not giving Elaine any advice here because I don't really know her specific situation, but we can talk in some generalities here to get some ideas of some things that can show up when digestive malfunctions start to improve. And when we're talking about improving digestive malfunctions, we're talking about taking steps to improve stomach acid. It's very common today for someone not to be making enough stomach acid, so we're talking about taking steps to repair that malfunction and allow the body to acidify the food correctly in the stomach like it's supposed to. We're talking about taking steps to improve bile flow, and that usually means thinning out the bile so that it can flow correctly. And bile is this soapy substance that's made by the liver, and then it's stored in the gallbladder, and the gallbladder sends it down here when these acidic products leave the stomach. So bile is very important. It helps us emulsify our dietary fats. It helps us access fat-soluble vitamins like A, E, D, and K, and it helps us neutralize the acids that leave the stomach. So all those processes are very important. We can also be talking about improving any type of overgrowth, like a bacterial overgrowth, like an H. pylori that exists in the stomach, or some type of overgrowth in the small intestine, or a SIBO, or even a fungal issue in this small intestinal issue, or even gut flora, taking steps to improve the gut flora. And when we're talking about probiotics and improving gut flora, we're talking about the large intestine. We shouldn't have a lot of bacteria in the stomach or the small intestine. Most of our good bacteria should be in this large intestine. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about improving our gut flora. Maybe there's some dysbiosis, maybe too many bad guys. So those steps could include wiping out these bad guys in the stomach, in the small intestine, or even in the large intestine. Or those steps could include using probiotics to replenish this good gut flora in the large intestine. And the final step that we'll talk about is just using digestive enzymes to replenish enzymes that may not be available to us because of the type of the food that we're eating, or maybe our age, and a lot of our enzymes have been deplenished. So these are the steps that we're talking about, and I'm not going to talk about how to do any of these things. I'll put links to videos of where we've covered all this stuff before in the description below this video if you haven't seen this. But in this video, we really want to talk about the signs that can come when things are improving, but maybe you're not there yet. Maybe all of your symptoms are not improved, but these other things kind of start to show up that can give us an idea if we're moving in the right direction. So some positive signs that you might feel good about are anything that is an improved digestive symptom, whether it's burping or bloating or indigestion or constipation or acid reflux, all those things, when any of those are improving, that's a sign that you're moving in the right direction. If you have things like indigestion or nausea, or maybe you don't feel right when you eat a meal that's higher in fat. If you eat higher fat foods and you don't tolerate that very well, and you start to see that improve, that's a great sign of moving in the right direction. Changes in your stool, and that could be changes to where maybe you're correcting issues where you have a chronic diarrhea and the stool is too loose, or maybe a chronic constipation where your stool leans too far on that hard and constipated side. Undigested food, seeing that in your stool, if that starts to decrease, that's a sign that things are going in the right direction. If your reflux improves, if your appetite improves. And I even hear from a lot of people that will like become ravenous when they start to improve digestion. I didn't really feel like eating before, but now I can't stop eating. And this is pretty common just because now you're actually breaking down your food into these elemental nutrients like vitamins and minerals and amino acids and those dietary fats, all those things that the body really needs. And if you weren't able to do that before, and now you are, the body's like, yeah, give me more of this. This is what I've been looking for. So this usually doesn't last for too long, the whole ravenous thing, but I do hear from a lot of people where that happens when they really start to improve their digestive function. People can also see energy increase and even mental clarity, and especially cravings for things like carbs and sugars and processed junk. Just because when someone can't digest their food correctly, all this junk is a lot easier for the body to break down and turn into a fuel source. It's easier to break down some kind of processed junk food bar than it is to digest a steak or even broccoli. So when someone's digestion isn't working correctly, they'll have a lot of these cravings for a lot of junk and sugars that the body can turn into fuel. But once you can start get all the nutrients that the body needs out of the real food that you're eating, then a lot of these cravings go down. So these are just some common signs of things that can improve when you're improving digestion. But let's dig into Elaine's question a little bit, because she wants to know, well, what about the unpleasant signs? What about the things that I don't love? Are those really things telling me that I'm improving and that I'm going in the right direction? Or am I taking the wrong steps and I'm making things worse? Because for most of the things that we're going to talk about, these unpleasant signs that you might be improving digestion, these only are beneficial if you're taking steps to improve your digestion. If you just happen to, oh, my gas is all foul now all of a sudden, well, that's probably a sign of something going wrong. That's probably not things moving in the right direction if you're not taking steps to correct digestive malfunctions. But let's hit this one that Elaine talked about first, and that's an increase in gas, and maybe it's a little more odorous. Maybe it's more foul and people are like kicking you out of the car. And this is pretty common when someone has bile that has been too thick and sticky to flow correctly, and it's really been backed up for a long time. You know, the liver filters all these toxins out of the body, and it puts a lot of those toxins into our bile. So then when this bile comes down here to neutralize the acids and help us emulsify our dietary fats, the bile is carrying all those toxins through the intestinal tract. And then those toxins go out the back door when we poop like a champion. So if this bile isn't flowing correctly, a lot of those toxins get backed up. So then if you take steps to thin out that bile, like we teach people to do, now the bile is going to start flowing, and a lot of these toxins that have been backed up are now going to start flowing out of the system and leaving the system. So a lot of that can create more gases and pressure, and the body's like, how do I get rid of this? And then the gas goes out the back door, and it's a little bit foul because of all these toxins that have been accumulated. And this is pretty common to see when the case is severe, when someone's bile has really been backed up. And it usually doesn't last that long, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And if they continue to take steps to thin the bile and get the body detoxing the way that it should, that will generally improve. And the next thing that Elaine asked about was like skin issues or rashes that can kind of show up or magnify. And this is another issue that seems to be more common when bile flow is involved. When improving bile flow and now all these toxins are coming out, if more junk is coming out than the body can really deal with at one time, the body's going to say, oh, what else can I do with this? I can't just leave it in the bloodstream and have it filtering around the system, because the system will be too toxic and it can make a lot of trouble. So I'm going to try and push some of these toxins out through the pores in the skin, and then those pores get clogged up with all this filth and junk and can create a rash or some type of skin issue or a magnification of that skin issue. And what was interesting to me was just that Elaine said that started for her around the time that she started eating keto. And that's pretty common that we hear that, because someone would be eating a high-fat diet without proper bile flow. Well, now all these fats are coming in that can't be emulsified correctly. They can't be processed correctly. So they become a burden to the body, and the body wants to try to push those out through the skin. So we see that happen a lot when someone doesn't have bile flowing correctly, or when they first start to get things moving and too many toxins are coming out. So we like to see people maybe increase the amount of water that you're drinking to help wash out more of those toxins. if you qualify to do that. If your blood pressure is already too low, then that might not be a step that you have the ability to take, because drinking a whole bunch more water is just going to wash away the small amount of minerals you have, and you're going to feel pretty lousy when that happens. But that is a common sign. And with these signs that we're talking about, where things are feeling worse or maybe new symptoms are showing up, that doesn't mean you want those new symptoms going on for months at a time. Something is not going right if that's happening. But when these show up temporarily, they make sense for a lot of the things that we're talking about here. Now, one of my favorite things to see is changes in stool. And especially if someone's already dealing with a stool that's leaning a little bit too loose or a little bit too far on that constipated side. And even if they're not, and all of a sudden they are, it can still be a sign of improvement, because if your stool is moving too loose all of a sudden, or that's magnifying, that could be a sign that you're improving this stomach acid function faster than you're improving the bile flow. Remember, this bile is supposed to come down and neutralize the acids that are leaving the stomach. And there's bicarb that comes out of the pancreas that helps neutralize those a little bit too. But bile seems to be the really big player here. And when bile isn't flowing correctly, those loose stool issues can really be magnified, because these acids are not meant to be held in this small intestine. All these intestinal linings are not meant to hold the acid the way that the stomach is meant to hold those acids. The stomach can do that, but it irritates these linings too much when those acids are not getting neutralized. So then the body will try to bring all the water that it can to cool off those acids. It'll rush it through the system really fast, and then it shoots us off the toilet like a rocket when we have this crazy diarrhea. So that can be a sign that this is improving faster than this if that stool is getting too loose. And keep in mind that there's other causes of loose stools. This is not the only one. It's just the most common cause when we see someone taking steps to improve digestion and then their stool becomes more loose. Now, the opposite of that is maybe the stool becomes more hard, or a person becomes more constipated. And in that scenario, they're likely improving bile flow faster than they're improving that stomach acid function, or the ability for the stomach to really acidify the food correctly. Because basically our stool moves through the system at a pace according to its acidity level. So if there's more bile coming down and neutralizing acids that aren't really there, maybe there's not very much acid, so now the stool is in a more alkaline state because there's more bile than there is stomach acid. So we'll move through the system slower, and it can get more dry and hard and difficult to move. So in either of those scenarios, you kind of just want to put more effort in fixing the other side. If stool is too loose, you want to be more aggressive about improving bile flow. Maybe if your bile is really stubborn and you can't get it moving, you might even need to supplement with some ox bile in between your meals. We don't like to see people take ox bile with their meal like most people do. We view that as a big mistake, because you're turning off the ability for the stomach to acidify the food correctly. You're neutralizing the acids while they're still in the stomach. That's not how the body works. So if stool is really acidic and the bile is not catching up, someone might use some ox bile away from their food. We'll put a link in the description below for our video on adjusting ox bile dose and timing if you feel like that's something that you need to do. But for most people that still have their gallbladder, we like to see them take the steps to thin that bile out and get it flowing, so they're not using something to replace the bile. They're allowing the body to function the way that it's supposed to function. And if you've lost your gallbladder, we'll put a link in the description below for 6 steps for those who have lost their gallbladder. Now, the next symptom we can see come up is reflux. We can see this get magnified for somebody when they start to acidify the food in their stomach, or it might show up for someone who never experienced reflux before. And this will happen because reflux happens because this LES valve, this lower esophageal sphincter at the bottom of the esophagus, it opens so food can come in, and then once we're acidifying that food, those acids trigger that LES to close, and that's what stops reflux. But if a person just has a small amount of acid, but it's not enough to trigger that LES valve to close, then the small amount of acid they have is going to come back up and it's really going to burn them. So a lot of people are not acidifying their food correctly because they basically aren't making any stomach acid at all, or maybe they're taking a medication to turn it off, or maybe they're taking antacids with every meal to kind of neutralize all those acids. So that has the ability to relieve some symptoms, but they're not acidifying their food the way that they should so that they can break it down and get the nutrients out of that food. So if someone doesn't have any stomach acid, they can be having reflux but not feel it. They won't feel the burning because there's no acid there. Digestive enzymes can still come up and damage those tissues, but there's no acid to tell the person, hey, there's a problem, you can feel this, you need to do something about it. But when they start putting some acid in here, maybe they're supplementing with betaine HCl, maybe they're using a little bit of apple cider vinegar or something. Now they have a small amount of acid, but it's not enough to trigger this valve to close, so the amount of acid that is in there is now going to come back up and burn them and magnify or show up with new reflux symptoms. So that's what can happen when someone maybe didn't have reflux or maybe just a little bit, and they start adding a little bit of acid. That can get worse until they can acidify the stomach enough to trigger that valve to close, and then that reflux symptom will go away. Unless the person has a hiatal hernia that's restricting that from closing, that's another possibility. If you feel like that's an issue for you, we'll put a link in the description below for our video on how to fix a hiatal hernia. Now, the other possibility is that maybe somebody's making enough stomach acid, but somehow some type of bacterial overgrowth got in. And usually an overgrowth will get in because someone's not making enough stomach acid for a period of time, and then that acid isn't there to fry the bad guys. That acid doesn't just help us digest our food, it's the barrier that keeps all the bad guys out of the body. So when someone's not making enough stomach acid, bacteria or some other kind of varmint comes in here and sets up camp. And then for a lot of these bad guys, the waste product that they put off is alkaline. So your person might start making more stomach acid on their own again, but all this alkaline waste from this bacterial overgrowth neutralizes those acids, so it's almost like they're not making any. So they're not really acidifying their food, and they're not making the stomach acidic enough to trigger this valve to close because all the alkaline waste from the overgrowth is neutralizing those acids. So one of the steps that we like to see a lot of people take is to take steps to reduce any type of overgrowth in the stomach or the small intestine. But killing off those bad guys can create a variety of symptoms or magnify those symptoms. So a lot of the symptoms that we see are from the die-off that can come from killing off these bad guys. And even just supplementing with betaine HCl and helping to acidify this stomach, that alone has the ability to kill off some bacteria and create some symptoms from that die-off. So we see people that really need HCl the most, when they first start using it, will often have a miserable time. And we'll put a link in the description below for our podcast on understanding steps you can take when taking HCl is very difficult for you, when it creates a lot of trouble. But the most common symptoms that come from this die-off would be magnified bloating. Killing off these bacteria can basically release all of their toxins or waste at once, because you're basically kind of breaking them apart. So it can really magnify the amount of toxins that can go into the system at once. And it can magnify bloating or cramping or discomfort or nausea from all of those toxins and waste. It can reduce a person's energy just because a lot of the resources from the body are going towards taking care of these bad guys that are in the system and trying to remove the waste that can come from killing them off. So there's a lot of resources that would go towards that process, reducing the amount of resources available for your own energy expenditure. A person can have trouble with mental clarity, and they may have a loss of appetite just because of just what we just talked about. All that junk in the system, the body could be like, don't send anything else down here. We're still dealing with the mess that came along with the last bunch of stuff. So that can reduce someone's appetite. So when you're trying to kill off a lot of these bad guys, there's a variety of reactions that can come up. And for most people, they will improve as you continue to knock down a layer of these bad guys. And maybe the first dose is the worst, and after that it might be as bad, but then it usually starts to get better as you take steps to kill off these bad guys. And we'll have a link in the description below on our video on steps to kill off bad bacteria in the stomach, and a video for taking care of SIBO issues, that we talk about some steps that can be beneficial to do those things. In the same regard, using probiotics can create a lot of these similar symptoms for some people. When there's still a lot of bad guys in the system and you're going to put beneficial bacteria, it can almost create like a war between the good guys and the bad guys that can create a lot of cramping or other types of discomfort while that war is going on. So we like to see people wipe these bad guys out, before they start using probiotics, and that can often reduce some of the symptoms that can come from trying to replenish that good gut flora like we talked about before. And an interesting symptom that could come up from taking steps to improve bile flow could be a gallbladder attack. Because basically, if someone's bile is not flowing correctly, this gallbladder continues to concentrate that bile. And if the bile isn't flowing and moving out like it should, the gallbladder just continues to concentrate things until it can concentrate it into sludge or even stones like this. And so if this bile really isn't moving, a person could have stones in there for years or decades. They could be in there for a long time and not causing any trouble, not creating any type of symptom or any type of gallbladder attack at all. But once a person takes steps to thin the bile out and now things are flowing, well, one of these stones could move around and block one of these ducts and create that gallbladder attack. And the person's like, oh man, trying to thin out my bile gives me gallbladder attacks. And that's not the situation. If you have stones in there, trouble is coming. If it's not flowing well enough that it's allowing stones to form, then eventually something is going to get blocked up, and it's very likely that a person is eventually going to have an attack. So for a lot of people, the only step is really to thin things out so that they can flow, and that flow in the movement is part of what can really help melt those stones and get them to small enough to where they can move out of the system without creating a lot of trouble. And we'll put a link to our video on steps to improve gallstones if you feel like that's an issue for you and you need to understand that better. It's just important to understand that when you're thinning things out, some of these stones that might not have caused trouble before could start to move and could create those types of symptoms. So let's also look at some measurements that a person could look at that could be signs of improvement. And any change in blood pressure has the ability to be a good sign for some people. Not for everybody, but for some people. If your blood pressure is high, one of the more common causes of that can be poor bile flow and an inability for the body to detox correctly. So now all these toxins are in the system is becoming toxic, more junk is floating around in the bloodstream, thickening up that blood and raising the pressure needed to push that now thicker blood through the system, and that can raise the blood pressure. So improving bile flow can really lower high blood pressure. Now, if a person already has low blood pressure, that's often due to an inability to bring minerals into the system because you're not either acidifying that food correctly or the bile is not helping us neutralize those acids and creating like this sizzle that really helps us bust the food apart and get all the minerals and nutrients out of that food. So it's very common to see low blood pressure in that scenario. So someone with low blood pressure, seeing that blood pressure come up, could be a sign that they're digesting better now and bringing more minerals into the system. It's very common to see a low saliva pH, like below 6.5, when bile is not flowing correctly and the system is becoming too toxic. So if that's the case, if you see a low saliva pH and you're showing other signs of poor bile flow, then improving bile flow can show this saliva pH come up. So if you see that coming up, that can be a sign that things are going in the right direction. You can also get these like 10 or 11 parameter urinalysis dipsticks, and they're usually available on places like Amazon. And you just search for 10 parameter urinalysis strips and you usually see them. And you want to make sure the ones you get have bilirubin and urobilinogen on them. And if those are showing up on a urinalysis dipstick, those are really strong signs that bile is not flowing correctly at all. And so if you're seeing that and then you're taking steps to thin bile and then these markers go away, then you know that you've really improved some things. Another thing is that if you start to see improvement to food sensitivities, and some of these things are things that will happen in a much longer time frame. They're not going to happen in a week and a half. Some of these things take a lot longer to see, like food sensitivity improvements. If there's foods that you were eating that would create symptoms, you may find later that you can consume those foods and they don't create trouble. This is often due to like a leaky gut issue, where these junctions here, this is like the intestinal lining, and when these junctions are tight, then these food particles don't get in when they're not digested yet and create like this reaction of an immune response to the body when these food particles get where they really shouldn't be. But when there's a leaky gut, they can come in along with other bad guys. They can come into the bloodstream, and then the body views those food particles as an invader, and it goes to war and creates these food sensitivity type symptoms. So if someone can remove a lot of these bad guys in the system, especially like fungal stuff and yeast and those kind of things, then they can heal this up, especially if they're using probiotics after they've improved any type of low stomach acid or bile flow issues. That's a good time to really use probiotics after any type of overgrowth is taken care of. And using probiotics over months at a time has shown to really improve these leaky gut issues, which has the ability to improve those food sensitivity problems. So also, if someone's seeing weight loss or muscle gain, those can be signs that you've improved digestion. A lot of times just improving bile flow alone can cause some people to lose weight because now the body can detoxify the way that it's supposed to. It's not taking some of these toxins and shoving them into fat cells and expanding those fat cells, and now my pants don't fit. So when you can get bile flowing correctly, then that can cause weight loss for some people. And if someone wasn't able to break down proteins into amino acids because they didn't have enough stomach acid, that can restrict their ability to build muscle because you're not giving the body those building blocks that it needs to build and repair tissues. And also, if the body's not getting enough amino acids, it could be breaking down your own muscles and tissues to access those amino acids and other nutrients that the body needs because they're not coming in from the food that you're eating because you're not digesting it correctly. So when you can digest those foods correctly and give the body the nutrients, then all of a sudden a person has the ability to maybe add some muscle tissue that they could not do before. So you can see there's a variety of issues that can come up when you're taking steps to improve digestion that might mean that, hey, things are going the right direction even though those symptoms are not that pleasant. And that doesn't mean you just want to suck it up and deal with them for a year. You really don't want to do that. But if they show up for a short period of time and then they improve, that can really be a sign that you're moving in the right direction. And also other signs going away is another great sign. So, there's other signs that bile is not flowing correctly. You can jump over right now and check out our video on 10 signs of poor bile flow. And if any of those signs are going away as you're taking steps to improve bile flow, you know you're moving in the right direction. I can't wait to hear about your results.